I'm Maryn.
And I'm Christie.
And you're listening to Hung, a podcast where we talk about true crime from the court of law to the court of public opinion. All right, so Issiah Ross Part 2. This is a common theme every time. I think it's probably going to be one episode, maybe two, but I don't know if I can get two. Well, here we are, episode 2.
That's right. But this is going to be it for me. I promise. And if it's not, then I'm going to clip this comment out of the beginning.
I promise. Unless
it is
not. And then you'll never know.
I'm pretty confident that we're going to finish it. And I think if we'd cut quite a bit of detail, we could have made it in one episode. But I think there are details that are important. So
yeah, I mean, I'm not complaining. Yeah. More so logistically for us. We're like, oh yeah, I don't know. Just one episode for sure. Well, 2.
And Maryn says, have you met yourself? Because you talk. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I've never been known for brevity. So
True.
Here we are.
And that's why you started a podcast.
Because I like talking.
Right.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of the case. And there's some pretty interesting things here. And then we're going to hear from Issiah himself and see what happens as a result of what he has to say. Well, we're going to start with some pretty sensitive information. So trigger warning here. There are going to be a review of some text message exchanges between Devin and some friends. And it's pretty horrible. It's horrible to hear when you are not even related to this person, but to be a parent or a family member listening to your child talked about in this way. It's just horrible. So
and knowing that because this is all on trial, people are making judgments of your child based on information shared in the courtroom, and we don't know lyric.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's also potentially describing some of the last moments of your child's life, which is also horrific.
Yeah.
You know? So this witness is from the Criminal Investigation Division. He was there on scene. And so he does describe the crime scene a little bit too. But the big part of his testimony is he's the one that downloaded the cell phone data from Lyric's phone and looked at the Snapchat communication between her and Devin, and then also Devin's Snapchat history of his communication where he's looking for a ride. The first part that comes out is the information between Lyric and Devin, and his user name was basketball_1296. And there's some information of Lyric sharing her address, telling Devin where to park and to keep the lights off until she gets in the car. That's really the only information that there is about their communication.
We know she intended to meet up with him, and that's all we know for sure as far as her intentions for the night.
Yeah, and the message that Lyric sends to him about where to pick her up is at 1:21 a.m. Ain't nothing good happening at 1:21 as a 14-year-old. Let me just put that out there.
True.
So, yeah, but that's no excuse. Nothing bad should be happening to a teenager either, you know. Okay, so then here are the messages that you're going to want to fast forward or consider if you want to listen to. So there is a pretty explicit conversation between Devin, and they spelled out this name, and I'm going to do it too because of my experience with it. So it's J-A-H, so Ja, D-E-E-Z, like Jadiz, and then Y-Y-Y. And I was like, wow, what? And then later they're saying Jadizi, and I realized, they were saying why, but with a southern accent. And so I didn't realize they were saying why. I thought they were saying W-A-H, wah, you know? And so I was like, Jadiz, wah, is what I wrote out there. And then I realized later that it was 3 Ys. And I was like, oh, never mind, Jadizi. Okay.
That's funny.
So a little lightness before we get into some pretty heavy. So this is from Devin. He says, hell you doing, fool? Jadizi replies, NSG, not shit, gang. Devin says back, you trying to get 8 tonight?
Gross.
Yeah. And Jadizi replies back, by who? LOL emoji.
He's like, are you offering?
Right.
Let's get some
I
context.
don't swing that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
and Devin replies back, LMAO, that bitch lyric. At that point, someone in the courtroom cries out, like just this wailing, you can tell, can't contain themselves type of cry, which I just like, yeah, I get it. Here you're listening to this conversation about someone talking like that about your child.
Yeah.
Shows zero respect.
Yeah.
That bitch lyric,
right.
that's how he refers to her.
Yeah.
Not like, oh, my girl lyric or something.
Right. Yeah.
More of a term of endearment type of something. No.
Yeah, and I mean, this might just be me reading too much into the specific language of it, but that feels like something you say to someone who is aware of that
Who
person.
she is.
Like, he's told him about her. He probably just wouldn't even say the name if he didn't know her, honestly.
Right.
It might just be
just
like,
some girl. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Devin then says, she says she'll eat both of us. LOL, LOL emojis. And then Jadizi responds back, wait, what? LOL, LOL. Devin says, LMAO, OMM, but shit. WTW. Laughing my ass off. Oh, I can't remember what they said, the OMM.
On my mama.
Oh, on my mama, but shit, what's the word?
Being like, so what do you think? Like,
yeah,
yes or no?
exactly. Right. Yeah, come on. What do you think? And he continues next message to Jadizi saying, you can't get car and shit first. LOL, LOL. He says, you telling me she don't got no friend or nothing? And Devin says, LMAO, that's what I asked. And she's like, she's not with none of them. She wanted me to come beat, but I'm not on wheels. And she was like, since she wanted to fuck me so bad, she'll fuck whoever I'm with too.
Ugh. And we have no proof that any of this happened. Not that it didn't, but all we have is him saying that she said it.
Right.
And this is starting at what time?
This is at 11:01 p.m.
And they don't pick her up until like 1 something or even like 2-ish. So
Correct.
he's like trying to find a ride for hours.
Yes.
To...
And I would like to point out that this Jadizi is not Issiah.
Oh, true.
So,
I forgot about that.
we know that he had this in-depth conversation about this, trying to talk this guy into giving him a ride. He doesn't end up doing it. Issiah does, but we can imagine that some of the same information was being shared with other people that he was trying to get a ride with, including Issiah. And Jadizi says, damn, she a eater. FS for sure. That's what I'm saying, and I'm trying to get 8, LOL, says Devin. So... what's the word? LOL, LOL. And Jadizi says, it depends on where she at. I don't got no gas, crying emoji. And their conversation goes from 11:01 till 11:23. And then later at 1:05, Devin says, LOL, LOL. And that's the last message. But he actually hadn't talked to him for a couple of hours almost by that point. And there are no other messages between the two. And they never were able to determine who this Jadizi was.
Well, good on you, Jadizi, sir, for not following through with that.
Right. And then Devin sends a message in a group chat on Snapchat between himself and 10 other individuals. And there are several messages back and forth. And he does at Portris, Pourtris, and that is Issiah.
Okay.
So he ats him in this message and says, you on wheels. That's at 12:46 a.m. And then to the group, 12:47 a.m., he says, who on wheels and want free buns? Basically, LOL, LOL, LOL. And then there are no other messages found from Devin that night. So we know there was a private message exchange that went on between Issiah and Devin, but we don't know what that exchange entailed.
Which kind of makes sense because normally messages just disappear on Snapchat, but I know there are people who save all of their messages as they come in. Well, and then a group chat automatically is set to save all messages for 24 hours.
Okay.
Because
there's multiple users trying to see. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, you can save things in the chat that will stay forever too, but you have to actively do that. Otherwise, it doesn't have the same feature of delete right away. But yeah.
Yeah. So Devin's mom does give Devin's phone number. They're never able to find his cell phone at home at the scene, and they sent a search warrant to Verizon for his phone records. And then they followed up on Isaiah's phone number. And then they got a warrant to get geolocation information from his phone and movements, which I guess because he was still at large at that point. So they're trying to find where he is. So they're looking
actively.
Exactly. So they're looking at the past data, but they're also looking at current data, trying to find where he is. So pretty fast. 3 days after the shooting occurs, they have filed charges against Issiah.
Wow.
This is the detective who gets the video from the Petro station that we talked about last time. And he does go through that video and show that he walks up to the window. So there's a nighttime cashier type window that's on the outside of the convenience store. And there's a little window that you can slide money in, you know. And he goes up. And it's unclear, like, did he not have his wallet with him or something? He walks up to the window, has a brief exchange, turns around, walks back to the car, gets something out of his car, has his hands in the pockets of his coat, walks back up to the window. The officer says he's walking in the way and holding himself like someone does that has a gun in their pocket. And you can kind of see in the video, I can understand what he's saying. Like, it looks like he's holding a gun in his pocket. And he goes up and he gives the guy the money for... He probably doesn't know how it works. How do I pump this gas out of here? Oh, you have to pay me first? Oh, okay. Here's some money. And I'm over there. He points to where he is, like nobody else there. He knows where you are.
Right.
I'm that pump right there.
Yeah, I
like,
just watched
where the one car is.
Yeah. I just watched you run into the cement barrier. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you do some damage there to our barrier? Because we might want to press charges.
Yeah, I'm aware of you.
So then he goes back and pumps the gas. So we watch that. And I was kind of wondering at the time, like, is there anyone in the vehicle at that point? The timestamp on the video was 2:11 to 2:19, which they then later fix based on the cell phone records that video surveillance was off by 10 minutes. So it was actually 2:21 to 2:29 or something like that.
Okay.
So I'd wondered, did they actually stop and get gas before they went? Because he did seem pretty calm.
Right.
So
I don't know, shock or something, maybe. I don't know.
The other thing that you can see in the video is that his hair is bleached blonde at the time. And he is also the officer that is communicating with the FBI in Delaware. And they have surveillance going on trying to catch him, and they do end up arresting him, and he doesn't get back to North Carolina until October 22nd.
Okay, I was gonna ask, like, how long did it take them to actually get him?
Right. Yeah, so I think they didn't actually arrest him until October 5th.
So 3 weeks.
Yeah, and then it takes him another couple weeks to get him extradited from Delaware to North Carolina. And they do at that time take some DNA swabs from Issiah for comparison, and later they get hair samples from him. So defense does ask him about, do you see any blood on his jacket when he's in this video? Doesn't look like he's covered with blood. If he just shot 2 people, wouldn't you have some sort of evidence of that? And
was there blood on the car yet that they could see?
Well, not from the surveillance video. They don't have that close of a view of the car.
The video is like more so showing right outside of the convenience store window area.
Yeah. Right. So the car is off in the distance, and then you see him walk up and you get a pretty close view of him as he goes to the window. But he's like, do you see any blood? You know, like if he had just shot somebody. But the weird thing is we know he did just shoot somebody because he says he did shoot somebody. The defense says he shot at least one person, Devin. So what is that point of that? Because, like, maybe he didn't shoot anybody. Maybe this is all I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, if they were moving away from him, it's not necessarily going to be the case that blood's going to blow back on him. So,
well, and maybe this is just a case of defense doesn't have to prove anything. So it's maybe more like hole poking and trying to be like, there's reasonable doubt. But
no, I mean, it's weird though, unless you're just trying to say that he didn't do any of it and he left and they were fine when he drove away. And then, wait, how do they both end up dead? That doesn't make sense. But yeah, it doesn't actually make sense with their story why that would actually be. And he says, well, Lyric was shot twice in the neck. I think he was saying there were 2 up close shots to Lyric's neck and shouldn't he have gotten blood on him. And he says something about,
like, if he was the one who killed Lyric.
Yeah, and he says both of them had at least 1 shot that hit major arteries, which is true. We have Devin, who the carotid artery and vein in his neck were hit, so an artery would spurt some blood potentially, right? Mm-hmm. And Lyric had her aorta shot, but I'm like, yeah, but that's inside. It's not going to spurt blood. Even though it was a major artery, that's not going to do that. And so the shots in her neck, they were all just through muscle. So they wouldn't have the same impact. So I'm like, that seems a bit like a misrepresentation of the facts that you're saying, hey, both of them had arteries. They both should have been spurting out blood. And it's like, not in the same way for her because of which artery it was.
Yeah. And from what I remember, it's like they determined that the shots to her neck were pretty close because they had what looked to be like gunpowder burns.
Yeah, they had some stippling around the wound that showed the gun had to have been within 2 feet of her body when she was shot.
Yeah.
And the other ones they said could have been that close potentially, but if there's something between the body and the gun, then you're not necessarily going to see that. So,
right, if it goes through clothes,
things like that, yeah. And he does point out, so the defense was asking about, well, did you try and track down any of these other people? Why didn't you find out who Jadizi was? Well, you already know who was there by that time. You know, right. And he says, well, when prosecution gets up and redirects, he says that they didn't get the Snapchat data back until the end of December.
Oh,
so they already knew other information that had confirmed who was present, and it wasn't Jadizi. I think it's always like you assume that they have all this information at the beginning, but sometimes it takes months and months before they actually get all the data collected. And
yeah, I think in some cases they even sometimes are finding new evidence as the case
as the
develops.
the trial is going on.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay, so now we get to the friend, and this was just like he was so annoyed to be there.
Christian Sykes.
Yes, he did not want to be there. He believed that his interview was anonymous, that he would be left out of it. And like we told you last time, he had been called by the sheriff's department, not the other way around. And he was at work. And so that's why there were all these missed calls. They couldn't get a hold of him that initial day that they had found out about him. And so the next day he met with the detective. But they kind of asked him some questions about like the story before showing the video. Mm-hmm. And says that like, okay, well, what did Issiah tell you? And he is like, well, can I say what he said? And they're like, yeah, you don't know what we just heard. It was all horrific, so I don't think you can say anything worse than that. He says, well, he said that they were going to run a train on a white girl. And when they got there, that they were hanging out, and at some point the other boy had a gun and was playing with it and kept beaming Issiah with it. And Issiah told him, cut it out, stop doing that, and had told him that a couple times.
And they like clarify without like being like, oh, maybe that it had a laser on it, like a laser
sight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what Christian assumed he meant by it, that it was that. Mm-hmm. But I don't think they ever really verified whether or not that gun had a laser sight. And of course, they never found the gun, so.
True. I mean, that is something that I feel like they should have asked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, did your gun happen to have? But I feel like that would be, I don't know. Who would it have been good for? The defense or the state? In a way, it would be bad for the state if it doesn't have a laser, because then it's like, well, can you trust anything that he said? But for the defense, it's also like, well, it might be good to say there wasn't one on it, because also that's not the story that they use either.
Right.
So also being like, well, his story isn't true.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And he says that the third time that Devin pointed the gun at him like that he went for the gun. So, I mean, this does seem like in this situation, it's not like you're really being threatened and he's saying, I'm going to shoot you. He's just messing around and it's not safe, right? You shouldn't be doing that. But then you're pissed off. And so you dive for the gun. And then, well, I think the first time he just said that he shot them and dumped the bodies, not really clarifying what order or why, just shot them and dumped the bodies. And he believed that the shooting had taken place in the car, but he said he didn't really ask any questions because honestly, he didn't believe him. He thought he was just making something up. And so he's like, yeah, whatever, dude. Mm-hmm. And later he saw some posts on Facebook about these missing kids and maybe about the kids when they were found. And it was matching up with some of Issiah's story. And so then he says that he met up with the detective and they're like, oh, so what did you tell the detective? Quote, exactly what I told you just now. Well, no. Yeah, and he says he doesn't remember talking with Issiah after he spoke with the police. And then that's when they asked him, did you know you were being recorded by the detective? No, it was supposed to be anonymous, so I didn't know she secretly recorded me. And I'm like, yeah, that might explain why he's being uncooperative. And then they enter the video into evidence and play it. And here's the thing. So last time we talked about that detective testifying and they asked her, was Christian's face ever seen on the video? And she's like, well, I don't know. I haven't watched it since, but I imagine so.
It should
Depends
be.
on how my body cam was situated or whatever. Well, you can tell that whatever she was using to record that was positioned in a way to not capture anything. And it almost seems like it's face down on something. So it's just picking up audio. Mm-hmm. And you can see a flashing red and blue light. But I'm like, right. She knows she was secretly recording him. She did not tell him that he was being recorded.
She's self-wired.
I'm surprised that the defense wasn't able to get that thrown out because he hadn't been told that he was being recorded.
I wonder about that. Because it does seem like they would have to get permission and like, hey, will you make a statement, you know?
Yeah, and he did say things during the recording saying like, yeah, I don't know. I don't want my name out there. I was told I was going to be anonymous. And, you know, he knows where I live. He knows my grandma lives down the street from him. Like, I don't want something to happen. If he knows I came forward and I said something, my family could be in danger. And he's still out there because at this point they haven't taken him into custody. So he's pretty adamant that he's scared and they're just like saying things. Oh, yeah. And not telling him that, yeah, well, anonymous. Guess what? You know, we're actually recording this. You're not going to stay anonymous. You're probably going to have to testify later on. You know, they don't tell him that. They just kind of like smooth over it and just ignore it and keep going.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty unethical what they did, if not illegal, definitely not cool.
Well, and I mean, obviously it didn't come out until Issiah was in custody. So, but
he definitely doesn't want to make it into the newspaper. No. About somebody, this so-and-so came forward and said, you know. But some of the things that were on the recording were similar. So he says that they got together on Saturday and he and Issiah were smoking. And Issiah said things went crazy last night, but he didn't say anything more than that. And then later, either later that day or the next day, that Christian had called him on Snapchat video. And again, Issiah had mentioned that things were crazy and Christian asked him some more questions about what happened. Christian says that Issiah showed him a gun and he does say that the guy was beaming him, and this is where Christian says he assumes he was referring to a laser on the gun. And that they had wrestled over the gun went off between Devin's legs, and then he shoots the guy. The girl was in the car and saw what happened, so he turned and shot the girl too. And then later a friend told him that they'd found the girl that was missing, and she showed him pictures from Facebook, and then they found out about 15 minutes later that they'd also found the boy. And Christian says he called Issiah and he asked Issiah if those were the people that he had been talking about. And
somebody else.
Not those guys.
No.
Other guys.
Yeah.
And Christian says that he admitted to it and he gave their names to Christian. So that Issiah told him their names. And Christian, so the detective is kind of like, so this is quite sensitive information to be giving to just anybody. And I don't want to offend or whatever, but I just am going to ask you, did you have a special kind of relationship with Issiah? Like a romantic or a sexual relationship.
More than friends.
Yeah. And kind of beats around the bush a little and then asks him. And at first he kind of dodges it. And then he says, well, I mean, it only happened a couple times, but, mostly we just hung out and smoked. Mm-hmm. And I would give him rides, pick him up from work, take him home, or vice versa. So I don't know. I can't decide because it seems like he kind of was trying to say, no, we just were friends and we hung out. But then I don't know if it's one of those, she doesn't seem to be believing me. And so maybe I'll say, well, I mean, okay, sure. Yeah. Maybe once or twice or something so that she would take him seriously or something. Mm-hmm. And if you think you're not being recorded and you can say whatever and you feel like you need to convince them, he might say some things if he's being pushed about a certain thing. He might say something that's like, I don't know. So I don't really know if that really was true or not. But when he found out from Issiah that Issiah was going to Delaware to his dad's, he assumed that his family knew what Issiah had done and they were assisting him to flee. And that's one of the reasons that he was nervous because he thought, they all know they're helping him. So that made him more afraid.
Okay.
And he described the gun. He said the gun was black, that Issiah had held it up briefly. He took the clip out and showed this empty clip. Look, I emptied this into these two people, and said that he was going to toss the gun, but because he was going to New York City, he decided to hold on to it. And in Christian's opinion, Issiah showed no remorse. He was laughing, joking, seemed like it was no big deal. And the detective asked if there was like Snapchat messages that he could show her. And he said no, they disappeared, but it showed that the last time that they had communicated was 22 hours prior. So that matched up with the timing of what he was saying.
I'm so surprised that Snapchat doesn't have some sort of database that can be accessed by police officers for investigations and stuff like that. It's like, nope, it's just gone. Sorry. And we just use this whenever you want. And anybody can say or do anything. And that's just how it works. Sorry.
Yeah. And he says that Issiah always had a gun. He'd seen him with a gun before. He'd brought a gun into his car. He told him he didn't want a gun around. He doesn't like him. And that the text that he had sent over Snapchat to him read, Lyric and Devin, rest up, with 3 emojis, which I'm assuming were like headstone emojis or something. But they didn't really describe what they were. She said, oh, is it this one? Can you show me which one it was? And he showed, but I couldn't see which one they were talking about. But they probably weren't hearts, or else she probably wouldn't have been
Could have been like doves, could have been praying hands, could have been lots of things.
Yeah, so there was a little bit of question about could they actually have met up to smoke on Saturday, because Issiah had left with Antoine and wasn't there at his mom's house. And it did sound like the way he was talking was that he had met up at his mom's apartment. That wouldn't make sense because he wasn't there anymore. And he also said he saw his mom pick Issiah up a few times, and he described the car as a black SUV. The SUV's white. And then the defense attorney was saying, well, so it says on the video that you said you had a special relationship with the witness that, you kept avoiding answering. He's like, I don't think that's what I said. And if that's what you want to call it, things like that. Like, he just did not want to answer the question.
Right. I wouldn't call it special.
Right. Yeah. So I'm like, you're not going to get him to say that.
Yeah, which to me is like, are you saying no, nothing happened? Or are you saying it wasn't special? Like, yeah, it happened, but...
Right, that's possible.
That's kind of the way that I read it. Things happened, but he wasn't special to me. Like, it was just physical and wasn't anything special, and I don't like him. He's, he killed people.
Right. I don't like guns. I don't like people who shoot people.
Right,
Okay. And then he does ask him about turning around and them being in the car and the shots being in the car, and him saying, well, he says he turned around and shot her. It does not mean you have to be in a car. Like, you turn around. I'm like, well, anywhere that you're standing and then you can turn around and shoot somebody, you don't have to be in a car. But that's what made him Devin believe that it had happened in a car is because he said he turned around and shot her. So he says Issiah never actually said that it happened in the car. That's what he assumed had happened. So the next witness was an FBI agent, and he did all of the tracking of their cell phone data. And it's really interesting, and it's also really technical, and detailed.
Yeah. And then also Lyric's mom had her phone, so there's no phone evidence for Lyric at all.
Yep, so we just have Issiah and Devin. And the thing is, when you realize that Issiah is admitting to being there, I mean, it's corroborating, but they're already saying that that is what happened. So it's not nearly as important as a defendant who's saying, I wasn't there, you know? So,
right, that would be like, oh, you're guilty. You're saying you weren't there, and you obviously were. But if you're saying, I was.
Yep, I was.
They're saying self-defense, right? So, yeah, I was there, and it happened, but it was for a good reason,
right,
quote unquote.
But it didn't go down the way you said it did. This was self-defense. Right. And basically, though, it does show Issiah's phone at his house, Devin's phone at his house, an intersection of Issiah and Devin's phone at Devin's house, then them moving towards Lyric's house, showing that their phones were there by Lyric's house on that corner where Lyric had said, pick me up here. And then you see the cell phones moving and being there
at the crime scene.
Yes, and then Devin's phone stops pinging at 2:42 a.m. and they never do find his phone, and that's it. So it was interesting, though, that Devin's phone was never found, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's like, okay, the last time it was located was at the crime scene. It had been there from 1:45 to 2:42,
so it probably
died. But then they never find the phone at the crime scene. So after the petrol station, he goes back to the crime scene, and then the phone is never seen again. So he must have taken the phone away from the crime scene because it was there. He wasn't there. And then the phone wasn't there. So someone else picked it up, or he picked it up, but that's really the only explanation. Then you see that he goes to Raleigh, you see his phone, and all of that matches up. They go to the forensic lab, the trace evidence, hair analysis, gunshot residue, the sexual assault kits, like hair from the sexual assault kits. The thing that I found was interesting is that they said there's cutoffs for when they can collect certain types of hair standards. For pubic hair, it has to be within 1 year because your hair goes through growth cycles. And so after a year, they're like, okay, that's not going to be, reliable anymore.
Okay.
And your head hair is up to 5 years. And she was doing her analysis 2 years after. And so they couldn't use pubic hair, but they did get head hair. But then as they were looking through these hairs, just inspection by the naked eye, Issiah's hair wasn't matching to these other hairs. But I'm also thinking he had bleached his hair. That just seems like his hair was totally different because it was no longer bleached. So anyway, but pretty much with the hair and with the DNA, it was clear that there was interaction between Devin and Lyric, but there was no sign of interaction between Issiah and Lyric or Issiah and Devin.
Right. Yeah, I think I heard a little bit about this. Like they found Devin's DNA, in Lyric's mouth.
Right. So mouth and in her underwear. And I think the genital swabs. And I don't know if vaginal swabs. I can't remember.
Well, and then I think I heard that on his swabs, they found evidence of her DNA.
Yes, exactly.
And his underwear, I think is what I heard.
Yep. So there was definitely exchanges between the two of them that their DNA was consistent between the two of them. But there was nothing from Issiah on either person. I would think as a parent, that's much better news that they had an exchange. And as much as you might be upset by the fact, she was intentionally meeting up with him for some sort of exchange to whatever degree she thought, it doesn't matter. But at least she wasn't forced into something with Issiah.
Correct. I mean, we don't know how consensual things were with Devin. I mean, from all appearances, it seems like they met up and that was the intention, but we don't know. The last time we recorded, and you mentioned something about like, well, beforehand, all they'd said was they'd done these sexual assault kits, and Devin was found with his pants down, and so it was kind of like, okay, what's going to come of this? And then turns out, okay, so nothing came of that as far as sexual assault on Devin or
Well, there is something interesting in that, but
okay.
it's inconclusive. So it does say that there's a swab from the perianal and anal area of Devin Clark, and there are 2 contributors, but only 1 interpretable component.
English.
So there were 2 different people's DNA that came back on that swab, but only one of them had enough data to be able to tell for sure who it was, and
it wasn't anybody involved.
They couldn't include or exclude Lyric or Issiah as the contributors. So they can't say it wasn't one of them, and they can't say that it was. So yeah, so it is interesting that there is information, like they do find some DNA, but they can't tell for sure who it is. And that's the only one that's kind of like inconclusive. All the other ones are, like, yeah, okay. Lyric, Devin,
Well, I mean, just based on what they did find, if it's going to be anybody, I would assume that it would have been Lyric, and just from, I don't know, fluids travel and things like that.
Yeah.
I don't think this was,
No, I mean, probably not, but it is a question mark still. We just don't know.
But there was some like reasonable or viable answer to what happened with the pants, which was coming down from being dragged.
Correct.
So I was like, okay,
Yeah. So then also the DNA inside the vehicle does seem to indicate that, well, Issiah's DNA was on the front passenger door handle, which makes sense. That's probably where he always rides with his mom. And then both rear passenger doors on the driver and the passenger side, Lyric, her DNA is on both of those, but Devin is excluded. And so there's no clear indicator of where Devin was in the car as far as like use of the door handles and stuff, just of Lyric that she was in that back seat for sure.
Okay.
It was interesting, though, as they're going through the DNA data, they're giving percentages of likelihood that it really was this person. And they're like 225 nonillion times more likely that it was Lyric than an unknown, unrelated individual, right? Like, these are huge, like 30 zeros behind the 225.
Why?
Huge number, right? But then here later on, the defense gets up and says, so there was that one that is the DNA from the external genitalia of Devin Clark, and that there were 2 contributors, Devin Clark and Lyric Woods, and it was 5.56 million times more likely that it was those 2 and not 2 unknown, unrelated individuals. And he's like, so, I mean, why was that so much lower? I'm like, that's still a lot. And he's like, it only needs to hit 1,000 for it to be considered extremely reliable. And I'm like, just because everything is quintillion, nonillion, septillion, and this one is only in the millions, it's still really, really high.
Layman language, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
This is like...
Yeah. He wants to say, so it's pretty much it's guaranteed that it's this person. Well, I can just tell you the likelihood. I'm like, oh my gosh. It's just like...
Can we transfer this into percentages?
Yes,
this
right.
percent chance? That...
It's like, it was them.
Yeah.
I mean, it was them.
Like 99.8% like kind
match,
of, right, and the other was 99.5%.
Yeah.
Like,
ooh, yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but
right. Yeah. So interesting that all of the blood swabs and the piece of fabric that was cut from the roof of the GMC Traverse
with that palm like hand print.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That they said lit up with luminol, and all of them were negative for presence of blood.
I was gonna say, it would be really hard to get that out of the ceiling of the car, I feel like.
And they did say that there were cleaning wipes on the seat of the car. Cleaning materials can also cause a luminol reaction. So if someone was using those cleaning wipes and then they did the same thing on the ceiling of the car and were trying to find that dome light, it could light up from chemicals from their hand actually rubbing along the roof of the car. So likely it was a cleaning product and it was not blood. It's probably his mom is trying to clean some stuff up because she's pissed. Like, look what you did to my car. I'm so mad. Or she sends him out there to try and clean up after himself or something. They also said there was a Pringles can with the lid off with the Pringles spread across the back. Oh. And there was a booster seat that had been tossed into the back of the Traverse. It was kind of funny, these descriptions. I'm like, well, what they didn't say is there was a vodka bottle or a, whatever, but there were Pringles involved. Yeah. No.
The most devious of chips.
Yeah.
What are those? Mashed potatoes then smushed into chip form? It's deceptive.
Yeah. But as far as the cleaning wipes, I mean, they were open and laying on the seat. I think somebody was trying to clean, and I don't know who.
Okay. Then you think you'd wash off blood from the outside of the
car. No, it seems more like trying to clean the inside of the car. And I don't know if he was like trying to get rid of their DNA. Possible.
Maybe.
But the spots on the outside of the car were pretty small, so he may not even realize that there was blood there. So I don't know. Either one, that he's just trying to clean the inside of the car to get rid of them, or because his mom's mad, or who knows. But he doesn't do anything to the outside of the car. But the blood that is on the outside of the car is Lyric's. So there's Lyric's blood below the rear passenger door handle, on that rim of that front passenger side tire, and on the front bumper on that corner going around the front of the car. So it does appear that either she got out of that passenger door and tried to run from there, or she was somehow running up the side of the car and had gotten shot during that process as she's running up the car, and then continued down the road to where her body was found and was being shot at during that process.
Yeah.
But not Devin's blood.
Okay.
So Devin's blood is found in drops a little bit in front of the car from left to right across the gravel road. And I think kind of at an
where
angle.
They're assuming the front of the car was.
Yes. According to what Issiah says it was. And
maybe
so based on
that.
that.
Or something?
Yeah. Based on that. But yeah, so there's blood on the rocks of the road moving across the road from left to right and towards where their bodies are found. Only blood from Lyric on the car.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the state rests. That's the end of their case. And like we said, the only witness for the defense is Issiah himself. So I was pretty interested to hear, like, how is this going to affect things? Me listening to his testimony, because defendants usually don't testify, and attorneys typically tell them it's not a good idea to testify and that you should just leave it. So is this going to hurt him or is it going to help him? And for me, I found him super believable. I felt like he was quiet, soft-spoken, seemed like he was trying to answer all the questions as clearly as he could. His statements seemed consistent with each other. He talks about meeting Devin, and that matches with what Antoine said, that he seemed cool, and they hung out a little bit, but they didn't ever know each other super well, and described his relationship with Antoine, that it was cordial. We got along. I didn't talk a lot to him, but I knew that if I needed something that he would be there. And he had never met or spoken with Lyric. There was no social media contact between the two. He had no idea who she was. And he says that he saw a private message from Devin on Snapchat and the group chat message, but he just went straight to the private message and was talking to him there and didn't communicate in the group chat at all. He said the message asked him if he wanted free buns, which he understood to be sex. And he said, well, if I can make something happen, then I'll be there. He sneaks out. He takes his mom's car, goes to Devin's house to pick him up. And then once Devin gets in the car, Devin gives him Lyric's address, which he put into his cell phone. And he said he didn't know who they were picking up, how many people they were picking up. He had kind of assumed that there was going to be more than one person. And he didn't realize until later that, oh, it's just one person and we're fixing to share, you know, which I can see that, like, oh, I didn't know that's what we had in mind. And he says, Devin asked him, do you mind if I go first? And that's when he realized, oh,
we're not picking somebody else up.
Yeah, there's just this person. He's like, yeah, whatever. So he tells Devin that, hey, I'm almost out of gas. I need to stop for some. And originally he says Devin thought that he was referring to marijuana, but he had to clarify, no, I mean like real gas. I've never heard it called that. So I don't know, but they were kind of vaping, and I don't know if it was a marijuana vape that they were vaping in the car. And maybe that's why he was like, oh, I'm almost out of gas, you know? And he was like, here, I got my vape pen. Here you go. But they get to the house, and I mean, just his description, I do feel like what he's saying in this part is true. This portion of it makes sense. Now, what he says about the actual events that happened with the shooting, whatever, we'll get to that. But some of the things that he says, because he talks about how he gets to Lyric's house and that she had said, pull over there and turn off the lights and whatever. He doesn't know how to work the car. He doesn't have a driver's license. He doesn't know this car. And so he's like trying to figure out how to turn the lights off, and they're flickering, and he's, you know, like scrambling around. And this is when I'm thinking someone might reach up and try and cover the dome light to cover the light inside the car. And then she finally gets in the car when he's finally figured out how to turn the lights off. And then it doesn't matter anymore because now you've got to figure out how to turn them back on because they got to drive. So he says he heard her get in, but he's not sure which door she got in because he was distracted messing with the lights.
I'm surprised, like, he doesn't have a driver's license. Does Devin have a driver's license?
Right, why doesn't Devin drive?
Like, take the car from him and be like, or like he be a passenger, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm just thinking this isn't the type of thing that you add into your story if it's not true. And it makes sense that he really is like, I don't know how this works, and I'm scrambling trying to figure this out. And she gets in the car. She's somewhere in the back seat, and Devin, he says, is sitting in the front passenger seat, and he doesn't know where they're going. Devin directs him, go down here, turn here. It makes me wonder if this isn't the first time, because how does Devin know where there's this access road right around the corner from Lyric's house? So makes me think that maybe he's gone out there and met up with her before. Now, whether it was like someone giving him a ride or not, I don't know, but just that seems like he's familiar with that area.
Right.
And it's not like right by his house, right by her house, you know? So I don't know. But they pull off, and Issiah says he gets out of the car and he's giving them privacy, that they're doing whatever they're doing in the car. And he asks Devin if he can hit his vape while he's out waiting. So he's, you know, outside of the car, hitting the vape, messing with his phone. And then sometime later, he starts hearing a raised voice that sounds like a female's voice, and he's not sure what they're saying, but then the door opens on the rear driver's side door, and he can hear Lyrics getting out of the car, and he can hear her in the middle of a sentence saying, I'm not your whore. You can't just pimp me out like that, which makes sense if you think that she's just found out that, hey, so you're going to have to do some favor for this guy.
Yeah, this is how I got my ride, so.
Right, and she's like, what? No way. This is the part I'm not sure of, that Lyric says something about, I'm getting the police involved, but I'm like, for what? Either just because you know you're too young and he's older and he could get in trouble?
I think that is what would make sense. Like, you know, you're pimping me out and I'm underage and you're 18 and, you know, I could get you in trouble, basically.
Yeah. So Issiah says that she's still over on that driver's side of the vehicle. Devin leaves, walks around to the front passenger door, opens it up, gets something out of the car, which Issiah doesn't know what it is that he's getting, comes back around the front of the car, and he has a gun. And he starts pointing it at Lyric, and she puts her hands up, and she backs up, and she starts running around the back side of the car. And he follows after her, and he starts shooting, which this makes sense with the blood evidence, that she's moving up that passenger side of the vehicle, and he's shooting at her. Issiah says that she falls on the ground and that she's rolling around on the ground making noise. And that's when the conversation between Devin and Issiah happens. It's like, all right, let's fix this up and let's get out of here kind of thing. And that Issiah says, no way, I'm not doing that. I'm not getting involved in this. You just shot this girl. And that Devin says, well, then you know what time it is. That's the phrase that Issiah says he used, saying, well, you know then
that you're
I'm
gonna
going
die.
I'm going to shoot you. And he has the gun pointed at him. And so he's like, well, I got one shot here. So he goes for the gun, tries to kind of headbutt into Devin, which could explain the mark under his lip. And is struggling with him once the gun kind of points in Devin's direction. I don't know if he intentionally tries to squeeze the trigger as he's wrestling over it, but then he does get 2 hands on the gun and says he just starts shooting and he just unloads, and that it all happened really fast. And then he gets in the car and doesn't know, like, what am I going to do? He's just kind of dazed, and Devin is laying partway on the road with his legs in the road and his upper body off the road, and he wants to turn around and leave, but he's afraid he's going to actually run over the bottom part of Devin's legs if he just pulls straight forward. So he gets out of the car. Devin's on his face, or on his stomach, I should say. And he initially describes trying to pull him on his stomach, and it's harder than he thought it would be. So he says he takes off his camo jacket. He has a quarter zip on underneath. He takes off the quarter zip, throws it over Devin's body, and uses it to help him turn Devin over. So I don't know if he like loops it under his arms or something, and
Right.
I don't know. He doesn't really describe how he used it to turn him over, but says that he turns him over and then he pulls him off of the road next to Lyric. And then as he was driving away from the crime scene, he realizes that he's got a bag of Devin's phone, the gun, and he's like, well, I have no business having this stuff. So he pulls over on Buckhorn Road, which is the road that the service road comes off of. So he just pulls over and he just hucks that stuff of Devin's into the woods right there. I think someone asked him about, what about Devin's vape you said you had? And he's like, oh, well, the vape was in my front pocket, so I didn't throw that out. And then he drives to the petrol station. And then while he's there, he realizes, oh, wait, I left my quarter zip back at the crime scene. So he goes back to the crime scene to get his quarter zip, and he leaves. And then he just went home and he was kind of like, I don't know what to do. I'm freaking out. I'm paranoid, like all over the place. He talks about meeting Christian Sykes and that he met him through Christian's cousin, Thomas Blackwell, and that they would hang out and smoke, and that later on, Thomas and Issiah had a falling out. And so they stopped texting, but he kept in contact with Christian and just talked about, yeah, you know, I would need rides sometimes, so he would pick me up, and he was really nice, and I would just give him a couple dollars for gas for the inconvenience. He says that he didn't go out and smoke with Christian that day. It doesn't make sense. He was at Antoine's, and that he did talk to Christian on Sunday, but he's like, I never show my face on camera. I didn't show a gun. I didn't have the gun anymore. I'd thrown it out. And that the gun wasn't black like Christian described. It was like multicolored of some sort. And
which is kind of matches what Devin's dad says. It was like gray and green, he said.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's interesting that Devin's dad described the gun, and then Issiah can't remember what color it was, but it was multicolored. Interesting. But you would think that if he's just like trying to use witness testimony, he would just say it was gray and green because he heard it described that way. But he just says, I don't remember exactly what color, but it was multicolored of some sort.
I mean, even Devin's dad was like, I think it was gray and green, so he wasn't like, it definitely was, but you know.
Right, yeah.
But he didn't say it was black.
No, right. And one thing, it was funny just the way that he spoke, like he is speaking very politely, but he did say a lot, like when the defense, well, I think either attorney, but when they would ask a question about like, so is this what happened? And you say, oh, that sounds right, or yes, and he's like, that sounds proper. He would say that over and over, like, have you ever used that sentence before in your life? Why are you saying that? Does anybody say that sounds proper?
Right. And like, also, I don't think that's how you would use it anyway. I mean, it'd be like, that sounds accurate.
Right. Not very many people say that.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. But he says that he kind of gave a brief description of what had happened, that, you know, when he was talking to Christian, that Christian's like, are you okay? And he felt like Christian could kind of tell that he was off. And so he's like, I almost died last night and just, I'm freaking out and this happened and I shot whatever. And he says he didn't specify he shot both of them, but that Christian must have just assumed, right, that that's what he was saying. And then he says, so he's talking about what happens afterwards, and just that his mom says he can't stay there. And then he's
because
trying
of the damage to the car.
Yeah, because she's upset and says he has to leave. And his voice kind of cracks as he's talking about that. Like, you can tell he's emotional about it, which I can imagine if this had happened. And let's say that his story is true, that he ends up in this terrible situation and then he shoots someone in self-defense, and then your mom's mad at you because you dinged the car and she's telling you can't stay there, and you're like, I just had to shoot somebody last night and someone else is dead and I don't feel like I can talk to you about it. You're kicking me out of the house. He's emotional. And then he says he was trying to go to his dad's house in Delaware. And then later he talks to his dad, and his dad says he can't stay there either. And he kind of breaks up a little bit when he's talking about that. I'm sure this, like, I've got nowhere to go. Neither of my parents are helping me. And his sister hears about it and she's like, well, you can come stay at my house. So that's where he is when the police end up picking him up in Delaware. And so at the end, the defense asks, who invited you out? Devin Clark. Who brought the gun? Devin Clark. Who shot Lyric Woods? Devin Clark. And then what? Well, Devin Clark would have shot me. I would be dead. I wouldn't be sitting here testifying right now. So
yeah, I know he also talked about like his involvement in some group chats after, like, when Devin was missing.
Yeah, you're right. So the state in their cross does ask him about messages that he sent, and that there were some in the group chat where he was asking about, you got wheels, like, whatever,
it's like
the free buns.
Friend group chat.
Yeah, that he later on texted, oh, I was like I was sleeping. Sorry, I don't have wheels kind of thing. So trying to act like, oh, I hadn't seen this message and I was sleeping and yeah, sorry, I can't help you, man, type of thing, to mislead and act like, oh, it wasn't me. I wasn't there. And then also texting with other people. They say Devin's missing and he's like, well, I heard Devin was at his house. What's up? Or things like that he was kind of like, if he's around, why isn't he messaging anyone? Because everyone's freaking out. Like, why wouldn't he tell us? And
says some stuff in the group chat like, oh, this is crazy. Or,
right.
Yeah,
things like that. And they're bringing up these messages and he's saying, I mean, I don't remember, but if it's on there, yeah, I'm sure I said it. And yeah, I was scared. I was paranoid. I don't want to be caught up in this mess, right? So definitely wasn't a smart thing to do. It probably felt smart, like they're not going to catch me if I say this. And then, of course, he leaves the state, which is also no bueno, to head across state lines after a crime like that. And then this is when the defense asks about, again, what was it that Lyric was saying when she got out of the car, which did sound like she had just found out that she was expected to do something with Issiah, and then the size difference between Issiah and Devin.
And I'd have to go back and listen again, but I want to say I feel like I heard it was like that she'd said something like, I'm not going to let you pimp me out anymore, or something like that. That it was earlier when you were mentioning like, oh, it seems like this
wasn't
he
the
knew
first
the
time.
Area, like they probably met up before. Sounds like to me it was like, okay, it may be that this had happened before and that's how he'd gotten rides, and that she's kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore, like
it is kind of weird though that the conversation or the argument doesn't happen until the end of their interaction, because if this was a pattern and they had done this before, then why wouldn't that conversation or argument have happened at the beginning of, like, now you have a driver again, are you expecting me to, you know what I mean?
And who knows, I mean, and again, like, we don't know anything, this is all conjecture, but in the conversations they'd had that we don't know, maybe she'd said like, I don't want to do something, and he'd said no, he won't, and then later said, well,
sorry, actually,
because he's obviously been a little bit manipulative in that situation.
Yeah, it does seem like it, and I think it's, like you said, this is all conjecture, and this is also assuming that she ever made these comments at all.
True. The one hard thing about it, like you said, is the fact that in self-defense claims, especially if there are no witnesses, you have to take their word for it if you believe that it was self-defense. And they also have motivation to not be honest if it wasn't self-defense. So
Right. Yeah.
the charges or the things that the jury could find him guilty or not guilty of were what? Do you have that?
Well, and this is interesting too because Issiah started testifying the end of one day of trial, and then he comes back the next day and he finishes his testimony the next morning, and then there's a break, and then when it comes back, it's on to jury instructions.
So you came to your determination and then listened to the closing statements?
Exactly.
Okay.
So let's do that this way too for us. So with the jury instructions, with Lyric, he is being charged only with first-degree murder.
Okay.
Which the requirement is that Issiah intentionally and with malice killed Lyric Woods with a deadly weapon. We think of malice as being like hatred, ill will, and they say the legal definition is that and more. It also means that someone is in a state where they intentionally kill or harm another without justification or provocation.
Like a senseless killing.
Yeah, almost like I just felt like it. Like I just decided that I wanted to do this, and so I killed him. There was no reason for me to do it. I just did it.
Does first-degree murder not also mean that there has to be forethought?
Yes. So it requires premeditation, which we know from other conversations, that can be very short. It can be within seconds, but you make a choice. You decide that you're going to do it, that it's not because of a fit of passion or something where you don't have any sort of reason. And with deliberation means while in a cool state of mind, so it's not just a fit of passion, with a fixed purpose. And both of those are things you have to infer. They're not something that you can necessarily prove, but you can look at the circumstances surrounding the facts, and that it can be inferred by the conduct of the defendant before, during, and after the crime. And also if there was infliction of injury after the victim was felled. So they're clearly, they're down and not, and you decide, I'm just going to go over and shoot them, or excessive use of force. And also his act was what caused her death, which, if he shot her, then that definitely caused her death. And that he intended to kill her, not just hurt her. Right. So Lyric is only first-degree murder. That's the only charge.
Interesting. So then again, it's got to be that or nothing.
There's no lesser charge on that one. It's just yes or no.
Okay.
And I could see a jury saying, I don't know, there's enough reasonable doubt that maybe Lyric was killed by Devin. And then you're left with, okay, well, what about Devin then? With Devin, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and voluntary manslaughter were all options for him, or self-defense, but these of actual guilty charges, right? So the second-degree murder is the unlawful killing of a person. So self-defense would be a lawful killing of a person, but unlawful killing of a person with malice, but without premeditation and deliberation.
So that's the fit of passion, the thing that we've mentioned, like heat of the moment.
Right. And then the voluntary manslaughter, that's the unlawful killing of a person without malice and without premeditation and deliberation. So second-degree murder still has to be with malice. So you still are
intending to hurt someone or kill someone.
Right. You're using excessive force. You may injure them after the victim is down. There was no provocation. You just did it, right? So it does involve malice, but you didn't premeditate it and you didn't deliberate about it. It just happened quickly.
Is that the only difference between the two? Like between first and second degree?
Yes, between first and second, it's just they're both with malice, but second degree does not have premeditation and deliberation.
And then the manslaughter is basically like you did kill someone. They died because of your actions, but you had no intent or malice.
Right. And also that it was unlawful. It wasn't justified for self-defense. So, like you killed them. It wasn't with malice. It wasn't premeditation, only under certain conditions that you're allowed to shoot somebody when you could say, well, I thought it was justified because they came on my property, but they're like, yeah, but it doesn't fit under self-defense. That's not lawful. You can't really shoot someone like that if you have a way to get away and all of that, and you chose to shoot them even though it wasn't with malice, but it's not lawful.
Okay.
right? So the only lawful killing is self-defense for a defendant, right?
Right.
So he can be found not guilty due to self-defense if he believed it was necessary to use deadly force against the victim to save himself from death or great bodily harm, and the circumstances as they appeared to the defendant at the time were sufficient to create a belief in the mind of a person of ordinary firmness that he was, was reasonable.
Right.
And in determining the reasonableness of the defendant's belief under the circumstances, the size, the age, the strength of the defendant as compared to Devin Clark, which I think is why at the very end they point out the size difference between them, the fierceness of the assault, if any, against the defendant, which he didn't have any injuries or anything on him, so there's really not that.
Well, he didn't have any injuries a month later when they got him.
True. Yeah,
but he
that's a
didn't
good point.
necessarily report any injuries either, but...
Right, yeah. And then whether the victim had a weapon in his possession, which we know he did at least bring the weapon.
Right.
Yeah, so he would not be guilty of first or second degree murder if he acted in self-defense and if he didn't use excessive force under the circumstances. So if he acted in self-defense but then used excessive force, then that would bring it up to the voluntary manslaughter,
Right.
So it's a little bit tricky.
I feel like there's a lot of nuance with it and a lot of like the details,
Yeah. So at the end of his testimony, I completely was like, I believe what he's saying. Like, what he's saying does match. Maybe I have to go with not guilty for first degree murder of Lyric Woods because there's doubt as to whether he or Devin shot Lyric. And then it comes down to what happened between him and Devin Clark. And that based on what the definitions were, probably voluntary manslaughter, that he went further than he needed to in the killing. And I felt like it went past what you could say really is just self-defense. And then I realized, wait a minute, I haven't listened to the closing statements. Where are the closing statements? So then I found the closing statements. And I have no idea why they were not in the recording that I'd listened to. And listened to the defense attorney, and he walks through exactly what they already said and nothing new. And then the prosecutor got up and whoa, everything changed for me.
Really?
Yeah. That I felt like she was able to show why Issiah's testimony was not consistent with the facts and with the evidence on the scene, which, like I said before, I couldn't see exactly where in the crime scene different pieces of evidence were, where they ended up. So his testimony seemed to match up with the bits that I could place, like the blood along the side of the car. But I didn't know about all the other stuff. So for me, based on the prosecution's closing argument, so Lyric Woods moving up the side of the car, that does still match. But this is the first time that there was a consideration for both of them receiving shots at the same time.
Okay.
Or within the same window of time, not like one's getting shot, the other's getting shot, but they're both being shot at as they're both running in the same direction. I'm not sure why, when you think about it, why if one person gets shot and runs over here, and then Issiah takes the gun and he starts to shoot, and Devin runs to the same exact place that Lyric did, like, would you necessarily run to the same place? I don't know. There's no reason you should.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's probably not that much thought process going on.
Right. But wouldn't you go put the vehicle between yourself and the shooter, not run out into the open?
Right.
So...
Well, but did he get moved?
Slightly. So this is the rest, is saying, okay, so there are bullet casings traveling down the road. There's blood that travels across the road. There's a spot where Devin's red slide is where there's some shrubs and stuff, and he realizes, oh, wait a minute, I can't go get back in here. So he kind of makes a quick pivot the other direction. She believes that's when he got shot in the foot. I'm not sure why she thinks that, but maybe that's why he lost his shoe. I don't know. And so he changes direction. She says he ends up face down next to Lyric. It doesn't explain, like you said, the gravel and dragging. It does seem like that happened somehow, but that the pools of blood that they found between the two bodies match up with where Devin was shot in his shoulder and where he was shot in his leg or something, and that then Devin was flipped over onto his back, and no other injuries line up with those two pools of blood being where they are. And that then Issiah stops, and this is the 10-minute window where he's deciding what to do. And then there are 4 more shots, and those are shots where he decides, I need to make sure they're dead. Goes back and he shoots, which would be the shooting someone when they're already down.
Right.
You know, kind of thing. So excessive force in that way. And there are bullet casings right there around their bodies, which also matches with shots being at close range at the end instead of those being at the beginning. So then I thought, oh, wait a minute. I might have to go a totally different direction based on that. I wish I could really see the evidence and see for myself if what she's saying makes sense, but it does bring in like certain aspects of the evidence that don't really fit with Issiah's story, as far as we said, like why the 10 minutes apart, but there's not enough gunshots for one person to have received all the shots that they did in one instance. But if you say they both received shots during the first instance, and then there's a time, and then they both or one receive additional shots. And the other thing she brings up, so she says he left, went to the Petro. Why does he come back? Because Devin Clark has his cell phone, and he knows there's information on the cell phone that will tie him to Devin Clark, the conversation that they had. So he goes back to get the phone. She believes that Issiah turned Devin over to get his phone, which was kept in his front pocket. And what else was in his front pocket? His vape pen.
So he grabbed both?
Well, no, it was still there. It was there in evidence when they took the bodies. So he's saying he had Devin's vape pen, but Devin's vape pen is actually on Devin's body in his front pocket.
Okay.
And that in the Petro video, you can see that Issiah is wearing the quarter zip jacket.
Did you go and watch that video?
No. She says it's there. I'm like, I mean, that's the hard thing with only being able to hear sometimes and you can't see, so you have to take their word for it. Yeah. So we did go back. So looking at the screenshot of that Petro video, I don't see any indication of a zipper. It could be the specific angle or shot that we looked, but I felt like it was the most clear shot.
Right. And I feel like if that's what you're going to say as your like smoking gun, it should be pretty darn clear that that's true. We're going to post it on Instagram, and you tell us, what do you think? Do you think it looks like he has the quarter zip on or not?
Do you see the glint of a zipper or no? Yeah.
And it's also just a really weird detail for him to put in.
I
took off my outer jacket, took off my quarter zip that was underneath it, and then I used that. Like, why wouldn't you just say I dragged his body over?
And she points out that Devin's phone never moved. It stayed the same distance from the cell tower the entire time it was pinging, that 61 times. So Issiah is saying that he drove away some distance with the phone and then stopped and threw it out in the woods. That's not consistent with the cell tower data because it goes by feet. And so if he really did drive up to Buckhorn and then pull off, it would have changed how far it was registering from the cell tower. So it makes more sense that the cell phone had stayed there, and then before it moved, either it was turned off or it went dead. But it didn't die before Issiah Ross went to the Petro station. So it couldn't have been that he took it and realized he had it and he threw it out in the woods because it wasn't dead yet.
Right.
So that doesn't fit with that part of the story.
What's the rules? What's the rules on what you can say in closing statements versus opening statements? I mean, like opening statements, they can kind of say whatever and then they just have to prove it later. And then closing statements, is that the same?
Well, so in opening statements, you can only say what you believe the evidence is going to show.
Right.
You can't make any arguments for your case. You just say, hey, this is what we're going to show you. But in the closing arguments, you are actually making an argument for your side and saying, here are all the things that I feel like show our story to be true, and here's how everything fits together in my mind. Right. So here's why you should believe me, and here's why you should take my side. I felt like she was very effective. And yeah, I feel like I had whiplash over that, thinking, oh my gosh, I think I'm going to have to totally switch what I was thinking. But I also feel torn because I found him believable. There were too many little things that he threw in there. Her argument partly was he has the advantage of sitting and hearing all of the testimony. So, but I mean, there are some things that I'm not sure really fit with Isaiah's story. And the biggest one being the locations of the shell casings, because why would he be following them? I guess you could say Devin followed Lyric and he was shooting as she was going, and he shot her. One of the detectives did say that it did appear that she was face down for some time. So could Devin have shot her in the back a few times, right? While she's laying there. And then the gravel thing and his pants being down, like that does seem like he did have to drag him. So where does that fit in the state's story? They don't account for that. They say that he was laying next to Lyric in that position, but they also say he waited for some amount of time before he came back and decided, okay, I guess I'm going to have to make sure they're dead. And he shot him and then he turned him over. Well, but then where's the blood where he would have been laying on the road? Like the position of the blood doesn't match up for that. So I don't know. I just feel like I really need the pictures. I need to see it to see if it really matches up. I really was swayed by his testimony, and then I was really swayed by the prosecutor's depiction of events and where the evidence was found and why that tells a different story. And it does seem like both of them may have been being shot at and both running at the same time. So I might be hung. I might not be able to decide even with myself. It depends. And I think part of that is if I could look at the pictures, I think I would be able to decide one way or the other if I felt like that really lined up with what she was saying or what he was saying. But because I don't have that luxury, then I don't know if I can decide which story I think is most believable, because I felt like they both were believable when I listened to them.
Right, and without being able to actually see what they're talking about. Right, or could that be not guilty for Lyric because they didn't allow for anything else?
Right, so I went from not guilty for Lyric, but guilty of voluntary manslaughter. And then if it's the other thing and he did all of the shooting, then it would be guilty of first-degree murder for both. I can't decide, so I'm going to have to say I'm hung. And I think we'll have to see with additional information that you add in if I feel like that would swing me one way or the other if I knew it. I don't know. I mean, I could see this being a hung jury because I think there are two ways to look at it. And if you believed his story or if you believe the prosecutor's story, I think there's reason that you could believe either one.
Okay, well, we'll talk about it more in the next episode. So next episode, we're going to find out a little bit about Isaiah's past. There's not that much out there. We are going to talk about some additional actions made by Issiah after the event. We're going to learn about some witnesses that were not allowed. A witness that was not allowed.
Okay.
And then just because Devin and Lyric were real people who died, we're just going to learn just a little bit about them and who they were. And,
I feel for all of the families involved in this situation, obviously Devin and Lyric's families. And if Isaiah's story is true, then also his family. And if his story isn't true, then still his family. Yeah. He may get what he deserves if he's found guilty, but his family is still a victim in this as well. So, it's really just a terrible situation. So I hope that information that I get will make me feel more settled one way or the other, even though it will require me getting other information that didn't come in through the trial.
And even though it doesn't matter because you're not really on the jury.
Hey, gosh, I kind of feel like I am, though.
I know. But all right, we are hoping to talk to you guys next time. And again, we'll post some pictures on Instagram at Hung Podcast. Until then, I'm Maryn.
I'm Christie.
And you've been listening to Hung.